Hello, welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Angelica Benson, Director of Development and Outreach for Lindamood-Bell Learning Processes. Lindamood-Bell was founded by speech pathologist Patricia Lindamood and reading specialist Nancy Bell over 35 years ago. They started their first learning center in San Luis Obispo, California, and now we have over 50 learning centers around the United States, the United Kingdom, as well as Australia. Pat and Nancy have always believed passionately that children and adults can be taught to read and comprehend to their potential, including those individuals previously diagnosed with dyslexia, hyperlexia, and/or autism spectrum disorder, as well as those students that have been negatively impacted due to learning losses from the COVID-19 pandemic. A Stanford study finds reading skills among young students stalled during the pandemic. Results from a nationwide reading assessment showed that the students' development of oral reading fluency largely stopped in spring of 2020 after the abrupt school closures brought on by COVID. The researchers said it seemed that these students in general didn't develop any reading skills during the spring. Growth stalled when schooling was interrupted and remained stagnant through the summer. A new global analysis published in January of 2023 reveals that students lost a third of a school year's knowledge and skills due to the pandemic. Most alarmingly, they've determined that children have not recovered from those learning deficits more than 2 years later. The authors urged officials worldwide to provide intensive summer programs and tutoring initiatives that target poor students and those who have fallen furthest behind. The co-author of the study said, in order to recover what was lost, we have to be doing more than just getting back to normal. In addition, Thomas Kane, the director at the Center for Policy Research at Harvard University, said, without immediate and aggressive intervention, learning loss will be the longest lasting and most inequitable legacy of the pandemic. So what are we to do about this crisis in education that our students are facing, especially for those students with learning difficulties? We can provide intensive sensory cognitive instruction to make a difference. We can conquer learning losses and improve basic skills, all of those skills that have been lost due to the pandemic, in a few weeks with intensive instruction, which is 4 sessions, 5 days a week. The results are significant if the instruction is targeted to develop the sensory cognitive processing as the foundation for language and literacy skills. A mother whose student came to us during the pandemic said, according to her son's teacher, nearly all the students in Liam's class were experiencing significant learning loss from their time remote. Liam, on the other hand, made significant gains. Liam was the only student in his class to read the words on the board, raise his hand to offer answers, and read aloud to everyone. His confidence is soaring. Liam's gains in basic skills represent typical gains after weeks of intensive instruction. So how do we make a difference like we did for Liam? Well, it starts with what we call sensory cognitive functions. Pat Lindamood said years ago, the brain can only receive information from our senses, and it is a multisensory organ. So from that belief, we have developed through our methodologies, programs that are designed to stimulate the sensory cognitive functions to help the brain learn to process information. Pat and Nancy have discovered that there are sensory cognitive functions that are foundational to all learning. The sensory input of imagery, in particular, is a primary sensory cognitive function. Throughout our journey, we learned that our instructional experience aligned with Dr. Alan Pavio's theory of cognition known as dual coding theory. Dr. Pavio claimed that cognition is proportional to the extent that the coding mechanisms of the mental representations of imagery and language are integrated. And to the extent that we can integrate these two systems is to the extent that we can learn truly to our potential. So we know there are individual differences in our ability to dual code. And in addition to that, there are 2 types of imagery that must be integrated together with language. The first is called symbol imagery, and that is imagery for the sounds and letters within words for decoding. And those can be thought of as the parts for words versus concept imagery is an imaged whole or gestalt for oral and written language comprehension, and it involves the whole or the comprehension of content to assimilate that together. So it's the use of both of these types of imagery that are needed for our students to learn to their potential. Let's look a little bit more at symbol imagery. When we have symbol imagery, it enables us to develop phonological and orthographic memory for reading and spelling words. If we don't have intact symbol imagery, these are the common symptoms for weaknesses in symbol imagery and phoneme awareness. Your child may have a mild, moderate, or severe weakness in any of these areas, and they may not have weaknesses in all of these areas. They may have just one or two. The first, very commonly, is we see students with weak word attack skills. This means they have difficulty sounding out words and blending words together. If it's a very young child, they may have difficulty retaining sounds, remembering which letters go with which sounds, remembering the names of letters, and integrating all of those together. So in addition to those difficulties, these students commonly struggle with word recognition skills. So they may have seen a word before and it may be difficult for them to recognize. So they're left to go back to their word attack skills, which are usually undeveloped. Hence, we have students that struggle quite a bit in reading. These students have difficulty memorizing and retaining sight words, the high frequency words that we must be able to automatically recognize to become fluent readers. Because of this difficulty, they have slow and laborious decoding skills, which contributes to guessing and contextual reading. Without those sight words and with the slow and laborious reading skills, these students often have weak comprehension, because if they're going to be guessing at enough words on the page, you can imagine the types of gaps they're going to have in their knowledge of what they're reading about. These students often struggle with spelling, either at the single syllable or multisyllabic level. We might see weak phonological orthographic spelling skills. Here's an example for the word opportunity. These students also show difficulty reading fluently in context and difficulty monitoring and self-correcting reading and spelling errors. If these students have a severe enough weakness, they may have had a previous diagnosis of dyslexia. Here's a quote from a mother whose daughter came to Lindamood-Bell and received instruction designed to develop her symbol imagery. She said, "Lindamood-Bell changed my daughter's life. In the 9 weeks that she was here part-time, my child went from not recognizing single sight words to reading me a book at the second grade level." Let's talk about the other sight type of imagery. Let's flip the coin for a minute. We're going to look at concept imagery, which is an imaged whole or gestalt for comprehension and thinking. And in this picture, we have a girl who's making a picture in her mind for the word clown. So rather than image the letters CLOWN, which would be symbol imagery, she's imaging what the actual picture is of clown in her mind's eye. Here's another example for you. If you have good concept imagery, you will be able to image this as a fluid movie as I read these words to you. The big black horse ran across the green field. With his head held high, his hoofs pounded the ground faster and faster. Then suddenly he was in the air as he effortlessly leapt over the tall white fence. For those of you that might have had difficulty processing the meaning of this, or even remembering what I just read, you may be an individual with weak concept imagery. Students or individuals with weak concept imagery often tell us that words go in one ear and out the other. That can be through oral language or when they're reading in written language. They usually grasp parts, random details, and facts. And when they have imagery for the content, imagery is the sensory information that will prevent language from going in one ear and out the other. So they use that imaged gestalt or whole. In that case, it would be of the black horse, and scale that up. And that, therefore, they can use that for higher order thinking, including getting the main idea, the conclusion, inferences, predictions, extensions, and evaluations. Here are symptoms of underlying weaknesses in concept imagery. Your child may have a mild, moderate, or severe weakness in any of these areas. Commonly, we see these students struggle with written language or reading comprehension. They may reread a passage multiple times and still manage to get just parts and pieces of what they read. They may resort to memorizing parts of what they've read to try to compensate for their difficulty in understanding the information. Commonly, we say they have weak oral language comprehension, so they struggle to get the main idea or the gestalt in conversation or when hearing language around them. They also struggle with critical or logical thinking and problem solving. They continually also show difficulty with following directions, which requires them to sequence parts together to execute a gestalt or a whole. Often we see they have difficulty with expressing language orally, so they may have difficulty communicating their main idea or their thoughts or their feelings. They may have difficulty expressing language in written form as well. So you may see this as a student that struggles with writing, like written language in the content. These students often struggle with interpreting social situations due to the amount of language around them they need to process. They may have difficulty understanding cause and effect. And if the weakness is severe enough, these students may have had numerous previous diagnoses, including autism spectrum disorder or hyperlexia, or commonly ADHD. Here are our reading circles for a Venn diagram. It's showing the sensory cognitive functions that underlie the component parts of reading. So here we have comprehension, the red circle, with the inner subsets of reading, auditory, visual, and language. And of course, we read to comprehend. We don't read for the sake of reading. So it's imperative that we have strengths in all of these areas. The sensory cognitive functions of phoneme awareness and symbol imagery underlie those skills in the auditory domain that we use for word-to-text skills. Meanwhile, when we look at the visual domain, we use our symbol imagery to help with word recognition, as well as in the language domain for contextual reading and fluency. And finally, it's concept imagery that we use for comprehension when reading. Let's put this together on our language processing spectrum. So we have decoding on the left and comprehension on the right. And if you have weak enough decoding here on this spectrum, you may be labeled with dyslexia. And this is showing us that there's a spectrum of weakness. You may have a mild, moderate, or difficult weakness, which manifests in difficulty with word-to-text skills, word recognition, contextual reading, and fluency. But that's not enough. We have comprehension over here. Likewise, you can have a weak, mild, moderate, or severe difficulty with concept imagery, which can manifest as well as hyperlexia and autism, which would represent a weakness here in this bigger circle. We also know students may have a little bit of weakness in one area and a weakness in the other area. All right, so I want to talk about one of these students named Buzz. At the end of 6th grade, Buzz hated reading. He came to us when he was in 7th grade and he was 12 and 5 months. He had had a lot of tutoring and summer programs, which helped with his phonological processing. As you can see here, his word-to-text skills were at the 95th percentile. But despite his improved phonological processing, he still couldn't read text accurately and easily. His teacher said he can sound out words better, but he still can't read. So when we look at Buzz's profile, anything from the 25th to the 75th percentile would be looked at as the average or the normal range, and anything above the 75th would be looked at as a strength. Meanwhile, anything below the 25th would be looked at as a weakness. So we're really wanting to see where his potential is, and you can see on his receptive vocabulary, he's at the 75th percentile. So we know Buzz has a lot of potential. But meanwhile, when we look past his reading scores, even down to his comprehension, he's fallen to the very low average range. In spite of some word-to-text skills, some strength in that auditory domain, what wasn't fully developed for Buzz is that symbol imagery. And you can see it here with weak word recognition and finally reading on the page with rate at the 10th percentile, accuracy at the 25th, and the combination of those fluency at the 16th percentile. Let's flip that coin over and look at students like Natalie. She had easily learned to read words in her early grade levels, but by fourth grade, she was sick before going to school, and moving her to the front of the classroom didn't help her performance. So she's a student you can see with tremendous learning potential here on her receptive vocabulary test. And when we look at all of her reading measures or all of the subset skills here in our Venn diagram, they were extremely high, well above the 75th percentile. However, what wasn't fully developed, and you can see this huge discrepancy, is her comprehension or reading on the page. So in spite of her development in these inner circles, it was that outer circle of comprehension which remained undeveloped. And that certainly manifested itself in her difficulty in school. So how do we conquer these learning losses, these difficulties with these underlying sensory cognitive functions? The first step is to have your child come to Lindamood-Bell for a learning ability evaluation. This diagnostic learning ability evaluation helps pinpoint underlying strengths and weaknesses, and it will give us a larger indication of a student's learning profile. Based on that profile, we will recommend differentiated instruction, which will change those weaknesses to a strength. A principal who commonly refers a student to us said, "It's like getting a fingerprint of your child's unique learning profile." From that, students come to us for individualized intensive instruction, which means they're here in our learning centers 1-to-1, 5 days per week, with an average of 4 sessions per day. And we know with enough intensity and frequency, it's possible to develop those underlying sensory cognitive functions. And I'll be sharing some data with you shortly to show that. Before doing so, I wanted to mention that we do offer live online instruction if you're not near a learning center, as well as in-person instruction. That live online and in-person intervention results have been the same gains in literacy. So we haven't seen a change in our instructional quality or results when we've pivoted to doing online live instruction. We know, again, with that daily intensive intervention, that will help students make gains. And once they see those gains quickly, it helps them build confidence and feel successful. These significant gains are often with weeks of instruction when we are able to provide it at a level of intensity. And a part of that success is providing dynamic and positive interactions to help us students fully engage with us to process the sensory cognitive information. And here's a student, Nico. He said, "When I was in first grade, I had a very hard time learning to read. My parents sent me to a reading summer camp at Lindamood-Bell. The teachers there are examples of adults who are not my parents who influenced me in a way that changed my life. Their positive way of teaching changed my life and taught me how to read. Their teaching method really helped me feel a lot more positive about reading and just in general." And that's something we find with our students. Once they start to read, it affects their self-esteem and their outlook on life. Just like Nico. They made me feel a lot more confident as a learner and more comfortable in school the following year. It's teachers like them that make the difference, all the difference. Their influence will last a lifetime, and I will always be grateful, and I will never forget them. So what do we do to create that? This is what the instruction looks like. We use very specific language to develop that simple imagery. So here's Nancy with Buzz, and she's asking him, "What letters did you picture for IP?" So Buzz is using his symbol imagery up in his mind's eye. And from that, he's able to tell us the letters that he pictures for IP, IP, IP. Once students have good symbol imagery, we use that skill and apply it over to the acquisition of sight words to build reading fluency. A big part of that process is helping to develop orthographic memory. And we do so by asking students to identify different letters of their images, which can strengthen our symbol imagery. So in this case, Nancy is asking, "What was the second letter you saw?" And because Buzz has well-developed symbol imagery, he can look up in his mind's eye and identify that A was that second letter. Flipping the coin for a student like Natalie, We don't ask her what letters she pictures because we know she has that ability. She's got intact symbol imagery. What she doesn't have is concept imagery. And in that case, we ask these students, what do those words make you picture? So if we have a word like a clown, she starts to develop this imagery in her mind, and she can talk about going from a single word like a clown to a single sentence to a whole paragraph. And we build that all the way up to whole pages at a time, which can help her with comprehension. Here's what some of our student results are. This is looking at students from January 2008 all the way up until last September of 2022. And these are students like Buzz. There are decoding only students. On average, they had about 111.4 hours of instruction. And I would say typically students come for 6 to 8 weeks. This is a little bit under that amount. For this analysis, we had over 10,000 buzzes, and on average, they were 9.2. We're looking here at their pre and post test percentiles. The light blue bars are showing their pre-test scores when they came in. And again, we're looking at scores that are below the average range being from the 75th to the 25th percentile. So you can see across the board, there was a real dip there, especially when you look at their learning potential or the vocabulary here at the 68th percentile. After 111 hours, you can see their growth, the retest as the dark blue bars across the board. All of these gains were statistically significant. Most notably, we were able to develop symbol imagery and phoneme awareness, which did in fact translate to growth in word attack and word recognition, as well as accuracy and fluency and written language comprehension, because they're reading more accurately on the page. Here's a group of students that had more of a severe difficulty in symbol imagery. They came to us with a prior diagnosis of dyslexia, and I wanted to give parents out there of students with dyslexia some hope and inspiration. It is possible to help dyslexic students learn. And in fact, we were able to do so here, pre-test and retest bars showing the growth after 123 hours. This is 2,700, a little over that, students like Buzz, and on average, they were 9.7 years old. And what we're looking for again is, can we bring these gaps or deficits into that average or the normal range? All of these gains were statistically significant. For accuracy and fluency, typically we see students needing a little bit more time in instruction, and that's the period of time where we work more on application to content. So these are typically areas we would expect to improve with additional instruction. These students may not have a diagnosis of dyslexia or meet the criteria after you can see these results where they are able to learn much more closely to their potential. So we're really inspired by these results. These results are also backed up by neurological research that we've done with the University of Washington and Stanford University, where we've done neuroimaging on the brains of children with dyslexia. And I'm encouraging all of you to look at our website if you'd like to know more about what happens in the brain when students acquire reading. Really exciting results. Let me move on to talk about students like Natalie. These are comprehension only students. On average, they had 103.7 hours of instruction. This is 6,227 students going all the way back from 2008 to last September again. On average, they were 11.9. And you can see from their pre and post test percentiles, significant growth moving them into the average range in all of these core areas that we measure for comprehension: vocabulary, word opposites, and that written language comprehension. Very exciting growth. We also wanted to look, building upon that, about that severe students that had a profound weakness in concept imagery. We're wanting to see, can we make similar growth and statistically significant gains with this population? And indeed, you can see they came in with much lower written language comprehension in the mid-low average range for vocabulary. But after 105 hours of instruction, this is 836 of these students with an average age of 9.5. We were able to move these students to well within the average or normal range. In fact, their written language comprehension was able to increase much more close to their potential. Really exciting results there. A mother who received Her daughter received visualizing and verbalizing, said, "The daughter that I see now loves to read. Lindamood-Bell was able to provide the right setting, instructors, and resources to aid in her comprehension deficit and build her self-esteem that was robbed by years of wrong placement and a wrong diagnosis." We know that we can teach these students to learn to their potential when we develop symbol imagery for decoding weaknesses and concept imagery for comprehension. If you're a mother or father whose student is struggling in these areas, we know that we can make a difference for you this summer. If we measure learning ability, differentiate the diagnosis, and provide instruction to develop the sensory cognitive function of imagery, students can make significant gains in reading in weeks of instruction, conquer learning loss this summer, and experience more success in school. So I want to thank you for your time today, and come to our website to look for additional resources and research. Thank you again. We'll see you this summer. Have a great day. Bye-bye.